quiet Sunday afternoon in the suburban home feels calm, almost routine. Sarah, a young woman in her late 20s, tidies up, her mind preoccupied with the usual chores. As she enters the office, she notices something unusual. An unlocked phone lying on Mark's desk. She hasn't seen it before. It seems innocuous at first, just another device left behind. But curiosity nags at her. With hesitant fingers, Sarah picks it up and swipes across the screen, unlocking it with an instinct she can't explain. At first glance, the phone seems ordinary, but then something catches her eye. A series of intimate messages flashing across the screen. The name Victoria stands out, repeated over and over in texts that are too familiar and too personal. Sarah's heart skips a beat. As she scrolls through the conversation, her pulse quickens. The messages aren't just friendly. No, they are flirtatious, sexual, and deeply intimate. Victoria isn't just a name. She's a wealthy older woman, one with clear influence over Mark. The messages describe lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and an emotional connection that goes far beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. A sickening realization creeps in. This isn't a one-time fling. It's an ongoing affair, one that has consumed her husband. Her hands tremble as she reads further, the words a blur as they sink in. Each new message stabs at her, her entire world unraveling with every notification that appears on the screen. She thought she knew Mark, thought she had built a life with him, but now she's unsure of everything. The late nights, the unexplained money. Now it all fits together into a twisted, painful puzzle. The life she thought she had with Mark is nothing more than a lie. Sarah's stomach turns. Her self-worth crumbles as the weight of the betrayal sinks in. She's shattered, her heart breaking as she realizes that the love and commitment she gave him meant nothing to Mark. And to make matters worse, he's been leading a double life with Victoria, the woman who's everything Sarah is not. Older, confident, powerful. Her mind races, torn between disbelief and searing hurt. The anger starts to rise within her, but she knows she needs answers. The truth is too unbearable to ignore. She confronts Mark, the phone in her hand, as her voice quivers with betrayal. Sarah. Mark, what is this? Who is Victoria? Mark's defensive reaction only fuels her rage. He claims she's just a friend, that it's nothing. But Sarah can feel the emptiness in his words, an attempt to minimize what she knows is a deep, painful betrayal. The tension fills the room, and Sarah feels powerless. The world she built with him is crumbling, and the decision now looms. What will she do with the truth she's discovered? Sarah had always dreamed of a perfect life. At 28, she was married to Mark, the love of her life, and they had a modest, comfortable routine. As a dedicated school teacher, Sarah worked hard, but she didn't mind the modest salary. She believed in their shared dreams, a future filled with family, love, and happiness. Their life together, to her, was a picture-perfect fairy tale. But over the last year, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in Mark. He became distant, often lost in his thoughts. The late nights at work, once a rarity, started to become frequent. And when he was home, he was no longer the attentive husband she'd married. It wasn't an affair, at least not at first. It was something quieter, more insidious. Mark seemed distracted, emotionally unavailable. As the silence between them grew, Sarah found herself questioning their relationship. The intimacy they once shared had slowly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow space. Mark, despite his outward charm and confidence, had never been fully comfortable with his career. His promises of success, of a better life for them, had begun to feel empty. Deep down, he struggled with his own insecurities. He wasn't where he thought he should be, and it gnawed at him. In search of validation, he found a source of comfort in a woman named Victoria. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Wealthy, powerful, and able to offer Mark the admiration and status he craved. What Sarah didn't know was that, over the months, Mark had been slipping deeper into a dangerous web of lies, seeking solace in Victoria's arms. Sarah tried to ignore the small, nagging signs, the unexplained gifts, the sudden increase in their standard of living, the late nights. But each piece of the puzzle made less sense. There was no explanation, and her questions were met with vague, hollow answers. He told her everything was fine, but something inside her knew that it wasn't. The love they once shared seemed to be slipping away, and Sarah was left helpless, trapped in a marriage that felt increasingly unfamiliar. Then, one afternoon, Sarah's world came crashing down. As she cleaned Mark's office, she noticed something on his desk. An unfamiliar phone. It was unlocked. At first, she hesitated, but curiosity overtook her, and she picked it up. As the screen flickered to life, Sarah's heart began to race. She knew she wasn't supposed to look, but something compelled her to do so. And as she read the messages on the screen, her world shattered. The phone revealed intimate, flirtatious exchanges between Mark and a woman named Victoria. The messages were explicit, filled with longing and promises of more. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled further. It wasn't just an affair. It was something far deeper, more secretive. Victoria wasn't just an affair partner. She was a wealthy woman who showered Mark with lavish gifts, offering him the life he could never have with Sarah. She was offering him everything Sarah couldn't give him: status, attention, admiration. Sarah's heart sank. Everything she thought she knew about her marriage was a lie. The messages weren't just flirtations, they were confessions. Victoria had taken Mark under her control, using her wealth and power to manipulate him emotionally and physically. Sarah's stomach turned as she read through photos, intimate texts, and the details of their secret meetings. Mark's relationship with Victoria had become a betrayal of the worst kind. Sarah's trust, once unshakable, was now completely broken. She couldn't believe the man she had married, the man she had shared everything with, had been living a double life. She had been blind to the growing distance between them, blind to the fact that Mark's love was no longer for her. In a rush of emotion, Sarah confronted Mark that evening. She threw the phone at him. "What is this, Mark?" she demanded, voice trembling with pain. She needed answers. She deserved answers. Mark's response was immediate but defensive. "It's nothing. She's just a friend," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's not what it looks like." Sarah's heart shattered even more. The words felt like a slap in the face. She had seen the messages, the pictures. The proof was there. His words didn't match the reality she had just uncovered. "Don't lie to me. I know what's going on," she spat, tears welling in her eyes. She could feel the anger rising within her, a mixture of betrayal and helplessness. "You've been seeing her behind my back. How could you do this?" Mark continued to downplay the affair, calling Victoria just a friend and insisting their relationship was purely business. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She had seen enough, and his attempts to deny it only made the betrayal sting even more. "I don't believe you," she whispered, her voice breaking. She had to step back to catch her breath. Her world, once so secure, was falling apart. The emotional toll was too much for Sarah to bear. The anger, the confusion, it ate away at her. She couldn't stop herself from obsessively searching for more information about Victoria. Sarah started following Victoria on social media, poring over her posts, photos, and the extravagant life she led. The deeper she dug, the more she saw the web of manipulation that Victoria had spun around Mark. The older woman used both affection and money to control him, keeping him hooked and under her thumb. Victoria wasn't just taking Mark's heart, she was taking his soul, and as Sarah realized the extent of it, her humiliation grew. Her husband had become a pawn in Victoria's game of power, and she had been too blind to see it. But now, Sarah faced a devastating choice. Should she confront Mark again and expose the affair, potentially destroying their marriage, or should she bury her anger and try to move on? No, each decision felt like a betrayal, a loss of herself. Sarah was caught in a limbo, her thoughts consumed with the weight of her emotions, unable to move forward. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was no longer the same. And in her heart, Sarah knew she couldn't go back. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she stared at the cup of coffee in front of her. It had been 2 weeks since she discovered the truth about Mark and Victoria, but the sting of betrayal was still raw, like a wound that refused to heal. Her mind swirled with questions. What did this mean for her? For their marriage? Part of her wanted to fight for what they once had, to reclaim the love she believed in. But another part of her, the part that burned with resentment, whispered that maybe it was time to let go. To let go. Was she not enough for him? The thought gnawed at her. She had given him everything, her love, her trust, her heart. And yet he had chosen another woman, Victoria, a woman who had everything Sarah lacked: wealth, power, allure. Mark was lost in her. The more Sarah replayed the scenes in her head, the late nights, the cryptic messages, the more her resentment grew. Could she forgive him? Was it worth salvaging a marriage built on lies? Sarah wanted to believe in their love. She really did. But every time she looked at Mark, all she could see was the man who had betrayed her. The emotional wounds were too deep, too raw. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending everything was fine. Mark, on the other hand, had no intention of letting Sarah go. He needed her to stay. Not because he loved her, at least not the way he used to, but because losing her meant losing his carefully crafted facade. He couldn't let that happen. He had made too many sacrifices, too many compromises, and if he was going to have Victoria, he needed to keep Sarah quiet. He needed her to believe his lies. "You're overreacting, Sarah," Mark said one evening, his voice calm, almost too calm. "This thing with Victoria, it's not what you think. It's just business, nothing more." Sarah stared at him, the anger bubbling up inside her. "Business?" Her voice shook with the weight of the words. "You've been sleeping with her, Mark. How can you call that business? You've been lying to me for months. What do you expect me to believe?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I'm not the one who's changed. You've been so distant lately. I had to find someone who understood me." His words stung more than she expected. He had just turned everything around on her. She was the one who was distant. Her mind raced. Was she the problem all along? Had her insecurities driven him into Victoria's arms? She had tried to be everything for him, loving, supportive, patient. And yet, here he was, telling her it was her fault. "Don't try to make me the villain, Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you to betray me." Mark's gaze softened, almost pitying. "I'm sorry, Sarah. You know I never meant to hurt you. But we both need more than this. You don't understand how hard it is for me to constantly disappoint you. I've been doing it for years." The weight of his words crushed her. He had been disappointing her for years, and yet she never saw it. She had been so caught up in her love for him that she had missed the cracks forming beneath the surface. The marriage, she thought, was solid. The love she had built her life around was built on shifting sand. And now it was crumbling. The more Sarah tried to convince herself she could forgive him, the more her self-doubt consumed her. Mark had twisted everything so skillfully that she couldn't trust her own thoughts anymore. Her worth had been chipped away, piece by piece. If I was enough, would he have done this? Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she didn't recognize. She started to question everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, about trust. She had been so sure of her place in Mark's life, and now it was all slipping away. She felt invisible, like she no longer mattered. The confident woman she once was had vanished. In her place was a broken version of herself, someone who wondered if she was ever worthy of love. She couldn't stop asking herself where she had gone wrong. Had she failed him? Had she failed herself? The emotional toll of Mark's betrayal was more than she could bear, and it was beginning to affect every part of her life. The isolation grew deeper as she distanced herself from friends and family. She couldn't bring herself to face anyone. What could she say? She had been betrayed by the one person she trusted most. Her marriage was a lie, and everyone would know it soon enough. Her only escape, her only solace, was in the digital world of Victoria's life. She had been stalking Victoria's social media for days now, reading every post, every comment, studying her every move. Victoria, with her flawless beauty and effortless charm, seemed to have everything Sarah lacked. She was everything Sarah was not. Powerful, confident, alluring. Victoria's life was a series of perfect snapshots, a glittering reality that Sarah could only dream of. But what troubled Sarah the most was the way Mark looked at Victoria in those photos. The admiration, the longing, the respect. It was clear that Victoria had something Sarah never could give him. Sarah could feel her envy grow as she scrolled through post after post. Victoria had Mark, and in some twisted way Sarah couldn't help but feel that Victoria had won. The emotional strain became unbearable. Sarah was losing herself, unable to cope with the weight of Mark's betrayal. Her anxiety, depression, and humiliation clung to her like a second skin. Then, Sarah began to whisper the names of her husband, and her friends noticed the change. Julia, her closest friend, had seen the signs long before Sarah had confronted Mark. She had known something was wrong, but Sarah had been too blind to see it. When Sarah finally broke down and confided in her, Julia didn't sugarcoat the truth. "You need to make a decision, Sarah," Julia said, her voice firm. "Either leave him or face the reality that he's never going to change." Sarah shook her head, unable to process her friend's words. "I can't leave him. I love him." "I know you love him," Julia replied, her tone softening. "But love isn't enough. You deserve better than this. You can't keep living in this cycle of pain. You have to take control of your life." It was the harsh reality Sarah had been avoiding. Julia's words pierced through her, forcing her to face the truth she had been running from. She had stayed with Mark out of love, but that love had been destroyed. Now, she had to choose: continue living in a toxic relationship or walk away and reclaim her life. Sarah's mind raced, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, humiliation, and fear. She had loved Mark with all her heart, but the realization that she might lose him forever, or worse, remain with him in a marriage where she would always be second best, was overwhelming. The weight of her decision pressed on her, suffocating her. The thought of walking away terrified her, but the thought of staying terrified her even more. She couldn't keep fighting for a man who had never truly fought for her. The anger burned within her, and yet there was a flicker of hope. If she left him, maybe she could find herself again. Maybe she could be free. But in this moment of turmoil, one thing was clear: no matter what decision she made, her life would never be the same. Sarah stood in the living room, Mark's face twisted with guilt and hesitation as he avoided her gaze. She could feel the weight of the years they had spent together pressing down on her, the memories of love and trust now tainted by betrayal. Every inch of her body was trembling, not with fear, but with a rage that had been building since the moment she discovered the affair. "Mark," she said, her voice cold, sharp, and final. "You have to choose. It's her or me. I can't do this anymore. I'm done being your second choice." Mark's eyes flickered with panic, and for a moment Sarah saw something in him, a flicker of the man she used to love, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence between them felt suffocating. "You don't get to do this to me," Sarah continued, her voice breaking through the silence. "You don't get to string me along while you play with her, with your life of luxury. You need to make a decision right now. Are you going to choose me, or is she the one you want?" Mark's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape. The air was thick with tension, and Sarah could see the gears turning in his mind. He wasn't going to choose her, not really, not in the way she needed him to. Finally, he spoke, his words coming out in a rush. "I can't, Sarah. I'm too deep into this. She gives me everything I've always wanted: money, power, a life that's beyond anything we ever had." Her heart shattered. So, that's it then? Her voice wavered with disbelief. I was just a stepping stone? A warm body to fill the space until you could climb higher? Mark's eyes softened, but his voice was firm, almost cold. It's not like that. You're everything to me. But Victoria, she offers me something I can't walk away from. His words hit her like a slap to the face. Sarah's mind spun, the room around her going blurry. She had been so blind, so willing to believe that love could fix everything. But now, all she saw was the cold truth. Mark had never really valued her. He had been using her as a placeholder while he chased after the power Victoria offered. His words echoed in her head. She offers me something I can't walk away from. The sting of betrayal cut deeper than she could have ever imagined. How could he? How could he discard everything they had for her? Sarah felt her pulse pounding in her temples, her anger surging like a tidal wave. She had tried. She had fought for them, but now she saw Mark for who he really was. A man who had used her, who had never truly been there for her. The air between them thickened, and Sarah, in her fury and heartbreak, felt something snap inside of her. You bastard, she muttered under her breath, her hands curling into fists. Mark stepped back, clearly alarmed by the venom in her tone. Sarah, please, don't please me, Mark. Her voice cracked with the force of her rage. You've been lying to me all this time while I've been busting my ass to make this marriage work. You've been with her, pretending, and now you have the audacity to stand here and tell me you can't choose? You've already made your choice, haven't you? Mark's face paled, and for a moment he looked guilty. But that guilt quickly faded, replaced by a defense mechanism Sarah had seen too many times before. Denial. I never meant to hurt you. You're overreacting. She couldn't take it anymore. Every word that came from his mouth felt like a slap in her face. He was gaslighting her. Again. And she couldn't let him do it anymore. Consumed by rage, Sarah felt the desire for revenge cloud her judgment. She needed to confront the woman who had taken everything from her, Victoria. The name felt like acid on her tongue. Sarah wasn't sure what she was going to do when she faced Victoria, but she knew she couldn't let her get away with this. She had to see the woman who had stolen Mark, who had taken the life Sarah thought was hers, and she needed to hear it from her mouth. The meeting was set. Sarah stood outside a chic cafe, her fingers trembling as she clutched her phone. She had contacted Victoria under the guise of wanting to talk. She had no idea what to expect, but she was ready for anything. Her mind was clouded with thoughts of what she'd say, what she'd do. She had no plan, but she was determined. Victoria arrived first, her presence commanding attention even in a bustling cafe. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Polished, confident, and unbothered. The way she walked, her heels clicking on the pavement, seemed like a declaration of superiority. Sarah clenched her jaw, her fists tightening at her sides. This was it. Victoria's eyes found her instantly, a small smirk spreading across her face. Well, well, she said, her voice dripping with mockery. The wife finally shows up, how sweet. Sarah's stomach churned with disgust. You think this is some game, don't you? Victoria's smirk only deepened. A game? No, darling, it's not a game. It's reality. Mark, well, he's useful to me. But you were just a means to an end. Do you honestly think he'd stay with you forever? He's always been a little boy looking for a way out. I'm his way out. Every word Victoria spoke hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. You're disgusting. Victoria only laughed, clearly enjoying the power she held over Sarah. I know it's hard for you to accept, but I'm what Mark needs now. You were never enough for him, but me, I'm everything. The venom in Victoria's words pushed Sarah over the edge. Her vision blurred with rage, and before she knew it, she was on her feet, her hands swinging in an unplanned motion toward Victoria's face. The slap echoed in the quiet space, the impact sending Victoria stumbling back in shock. That's for everything, Sarah hissed, her voice barely a whisper through gritted teeth. The cafe erupted in chaos. Customers shouted, someone screamed, but Sarah didn't care. She couldn't think anymore. She had just lost control, completely, and she didn't know what would happen next. In the confusion, Victoria lost her footing, crashing into the edge of a table. The sharp sound of her head striking the floor filled Sarah's ears. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding as she looked down at the woman she had just attacked. Victoria was motionless, her eyes closed, and a pool of blood began to form around her head. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her hand shaking violently. She had never meant for this. She had never meant to hurt her, only to make her understand. But now, she had crossed a line she couldn't return from. Panic surged through Sarah's veins. She turned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here. The reality of what had just happened hit her like a sledgehammer. She fled the scene. As Sarah disappeared into the night, the weight of her actions sunk in. She didn't know what would come next, but one thing was clear. Her life, and Mark's, would never be the same. The knock at the door was sharp, urgent. Sarah froze as two officers stood in the doorway, their eyes cold and professional. "Sarah Williams, you are under arrest for the death of Victoria Clark." Her world shattered. The words felt unreal, but the handcuffs clicking around her wrists made it all too real. They led her outside, the flashing lights of the squad car illuminating the silent street. Her neighbors' eyes burned into her, but it wasn't their judgment that stung. It was the overwhelming weight of her own guilt. How did it come to this? She hadn't meant for it to happen. She never intended to kill Victoria. But the fight, the rage, the uncontrollable anger, it had all led here. The police car doors slammed shut, and her future was sealed in the dark silence of the back seat. In court, Mark's voice cut through the tension. "She lost control," he said, his tone flat. "I had to get away from her." She was dangerous. His words were a knife in Sarah's chest. He, the man she loved, now portrayed her as a monster, driven by jealousy and obsession. Her heart cracked with the realization. Mark had never been on her side. He had betrayed her, and now he was throwing her under the bus, all to protect himself. The trial moved forward, and Sarah was charged with manslaughter. The legal fight was brutal, but it was the emotional toll that crushed her. No matter what the lawyers said, she knew she had killed Victoria. Her anger had crossed a line. In her cell, alone with her thoughts, the weight of what she'd done consumed her. Guilt gnawed at her, twisting her inside out. There were no easy answers, no escape. She had taken a life, and the woman she used to be, before the rage, before the betrayal, was gone forever. Sarah sat in the stark, silent prison cell, her knees drawn to her chest. It was the letter she'd done to her chest. The cold, gray walls around her felt suffocating, closing in as the weight of her regret pressed heavily on her chest. She closed her eyes, the images of Victoria's lifeless body flashing before her. Every breath felt like a jagged reminder of the life she had destroyed with one moment of rage. She had lost everything, her marriage, her dignity, and now, her freedom. She remembered the look in Mark's eyes when he left her for Victoria, how desperate she had been for him, for love. Her mind wandered back to the manipulation, the constant yearning to feel valued, to be enough for someone. Anyone. Mark had used her vulnerability, feeding off her insecurities, and Victoria had played her like a puppet, controlling everything with her wealth and power. In the end, it wasn't just the betrayal that shattered her, but the relentless need for validation that had made her so vulnerable. Her anger had consumed her, driven her to do something unforgivable. Victoria's death was her doing, and no amount of regret could erase that. The haunting question lingered. Is there any justice in this? Would she ever find redemption? Or was she doomed to carry the weight of her actions forever?